I wrote this book because I love this place. I love University City. I loved growing up here. And as I will get into during my talk, the library was a main feature in my life, and I turned it into almost a character in the book. I donated a chapter to U City Library, and so I have some stories to tell you about that in just a minute. So let me get oriented here. So I think the reason that we're all here today is because we love this place. We're rooted in this place, in University City. And we have this identity where if somebody asks us where we went to school, we always say University City. And they're asking us, well, where did you go to college? And I've had that happen to me numerous times when people were asking me where I went to college, and I said University City, and they gave me this weird look. You know, like, I never heard of that college before. So identity and place are very important, and National Geographic defines place as the physical and human characteristics of a spot on the map. And in other words, it focuses on where, and place focuses on what was it like in that place. And that's what I wrote my book about, what it was like. But I just want to back up a little bit, because in 2012, I went to Lithuania. And I went to Lithuania to give a presentation professionally, but I went there because my father was born there. And I wanted to go see the village that he was born in. And it was called Balat when he lived there, but it's now called Balate. And my husband and daughter went with me, and when I got there, it was a mix. It was a mix of where I live now, Montana, because it was filled with birch trees and lakes and mountains in the distance, and it was beautiful. But then I went to a Sept Square, and they were having like a fair, and they were selling food. Well, what was the food that they were selling? They were selling rye bread and farmer's cheese and sunflower seeds, and all the foods that I grew up with were right here in this market. And I thought they were UC foods, but no, they were Lithuanian foods. And so we have brought that culture here to University City in our delis. And that was a very important journey for me. So who's here? Look at this. I don't know if this is kindergarten or first grade, and I'm not sure that anyone here is in this picture.
You are.
I am, yes, I am. But let me just take you down. If you go over to the far right there, you know who that is? Look, that is Gary Rich. And Gary Rich has since, well, he passed away, I believe, 2 years ago. But I called Gary Rich because he lived, his backyard butted against the mansion that I'm going to talk about. And I called him because I wanted to know what he remembered about the mansion, what he remembered about growing up at University Forest, where I grew up. And Gary and I were on the phone for over an hour, and if you know Gary, we were just laughing the whole time. And we were talking about the gym teacher, Mr. Deardoff, and how we both hated him because he was mean to us. And it's so funny because the other people that I interviewed, like Bonnie Dansker is here. Where are you, Bonnie?
She'll be right back.
Oh! Well, Bonnie Dansker, there she is, Bonnie Dansker. And Bonnie Dansker loved Mr. Deardorff, right? And you know why she liked it? Because she was athletic. Well, Gary and I were not at all athletic, and so we had problems with Mr. Deardorff. And my mother helped resolve some of those problems, as you saw in the book. So I'm just going to go through the names here, because you might know some of these people. So after Gary, there's Vivian Walters and Steve Koslow, Susan Coonan, Susie Cohn, Philip Taxman, Steve Eisenberg, Scott Moncrief. I don't know who that boy is there, but behind him is Steve Solomon. And then there's me singing my heart out. Bonnie Schmitsky, you're here, right? Hey, there's Bonnie, all right. So there's Bonnie. And so there's Bonnie, and there's Bobby Billings. And so this was a great time, and I want to point your attention to this row here, because these are the parents. And they extended this was done in the cafeteria, and they extended all the way down the cafeteria. And our parents, what made our school so successful was our parents were so committed. Yeah, they were there. And as you read in the book, my mother was really there. And she was always defending me. So, and speaking of my mother gave me this book, Little Women. And this just changed my life. I mean, reading Little Women, reading about Joe, oh my gosh. I identified with Joe so strongly. I wasn't athletic, but I was a tomboy. I liked to wear my brother's clothes, and I liked to think of myself as being kind of athletic, but I wasn't really. And so I wanted to be a writer. Joe was a writer, and I wanted to follow in her footsteps. And I did a lot of research on Louisa May Alcott. And it's funny that the original book, she ended it with her not getting married. Yeah, some of you know that. And her publisher said, oh no, you won't sell any books unless Joe gets married. And so they changed the book to sell books. Yeah, yeah. And Louisa May Alcott herself never did. So this is the mansion that I talk about over and over and over and over again. You know, it's not a very good picture of it, but I have to tell you, after I wrote the first chapter, I thought, well, now where am I going to go with this book? I didn't know where I was going to go, and I started to do some research on the neighborhood in University City, and all of a sudden a picture of the mansion appeared in the newspaper, and I burst into tears. I mean, that's the attachment that I had to this mansion. And this mansion, I'm going to go through all the owners of this mansion because there's a lot of people who own this land that I grew up on. So at the time it was sold, Elsie Roberts lived in this mansion. And his daughter was Isabella, and if you read the prologue to my book, she is the person that I interviewed. And she was very gracious. We had numerous conversations, and she told me what it was like to grow up in this. I called it a mansion to her, and she said, oh no, don't call it a mansion, it's my home. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet, you know? But I kept calling it the mansion because it was the mansion to me. And so this mansion right here, with about 4 acres of ground, it's at 1433 Partridge Avenue in University City, and it's been sold by Sam Ladd, and he's a builder, and he acquired the Roberts, the whole 33 acres. So this is all the area where my school was, where the neighborhoods were, 33 acres of land Roberts owned. And Ladd was going to build a subdivision, but he sold these 4 acres to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And they came in and used this as a home and as a school, these 4 acres and the mansion, and the carriage house as well. So I love to read historical fiction, and so I decided this is what I love. I'm going to write a book that's historical fiction. And so my idea was to examine how culture changes a place, because this area that we live on had several cultures, and that's what I was going to write about. And so it's about 95% true, the book. Actually, very little of it isn't truth, I have to admit. And it's based on memories, it's based on the people that I interviewed, and of course, the newspapers. Lots of history you can find in these old newspapers, and it was amazing. It got me off the track of my book at one time. I was just going to write a book about the Roberts family because I was so intrigued with this family. And this is the book cover, and my daughter designed the book cover for me. And when she first did it, the girl's hair wasn't curly enough, and I said, oh no, curly, curly, make it curly. It's gotta be curly. Okay, so this is a publication about the Roberts carriage house. And it's a little strange to me because it talks about John Calvin Roberts, and he was a native of Tennessee, and he came to St. Louis in 1880, and he worked for the Hamilton Brown Shoe Company. And he and his good friends, I'm going to talk about them in just a minute, they started their own shoe company, and it became the biggest shoe company in the world, International Shoe Company. And we've all heard of that. We've probably had relatives that lived that worked there at one time, okay? And so they talk about that Roberts had this carriage house, and he had this large frame house on Partridge Avenue. Well, the large frame house was on his land, but it was the original farmer's house. He never, ever lived here. He only lived in the big mansion. And his daughter, Isabella, told me that she was forbidden to go see the mansion. I mean, to go see the frame house because it was no longer sturdy. So this is an illustration of the mansion that I found in, well, I think it was a 1904 newspaper publication. And this was a drawing of the mansion, and I knew that it was the mansion when I saw it because of the walkway off to the side. That was a big feature of this mansion when I was a kid, because I'd walk over here, and then you'd have to walk over here, and the steps, you could see how steep those steps were. So, you know, I'm little now, and I was like this little. Trying to, you know, get up those stairs was quite a feat. And it talks about selling this, and it's on Partridge Avenue between Page and Olive Road, and it's a double stone modern house, and there's 14 large rooms. There's water throughout the house, electric light, furnace, every convenience of the city. There's fruits and flowers, and they only wanted $5,000 for this. This is amazing. And so I showed this picture to Isabella, and she said, yes, that is my homestead. So let me just take you through who lived here. First it was the Benost family, and they were French, and he was in real estate. He was a developer, and they moved in, they built the mansion and moved in the late 1800s, and then the Orthwein family bought the mansion from him, and they only lived there 5 years, and he was into horse racing, and he actually built a racetrack on the grounds of the mansion, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. And then the Roberts family bought it, and And they lived there a very long time, and unfortunately, Roberts died in 1924. He had a sudden illness due to some condition in his stomach and passed away in the mansion. And when he died, people from all over the country came to the mansion, came to 1433 Partridge Avenue to pay their respects. And then Sam Ladd bought the land, and he sold those 4 acres to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they stayed there from 1953 to 1962. And then in 1962, a developer, and I searched everywhere in the newspapers, and I could not find the name of the developer, but this developer bought the mansion and the 4 acres and developed Forest Green Estates. Okay, so did you recognize this mansion?
Del Mar.
Del Mar. I drove right by it this morning. And this is at 7100 Del Mar Avenue. And this mansion was built in 1912. I have been inside this mansion. I went to a party in 1969 in this mansion. And I had no idea at the time that the original owner of this mansion was connected to my mansion. I had no idea. And so Frank C. Rand, he was a business partner of Roberts, and he was very poor. He came from Mississippi, and Roberts came from Tennessee. They moved here and developed, as I said, this international shoe company. And he was very famous in the medical community because he was a philanthropist. And he's described by physicians as one of the nation's greatest contributors to medical education and hospital development. So these men that hung out with Roberts, they had all kinds of interests, and they made University City and St. Louis what it is today. I mean, they were movers and shakers. And then I have one more person I want to introduce you to. This is Oscar Johnson was the 3rd business partner in International Shoe Company. And I'm sure my friends here recognize this. So in 1950, Irene W. Johnson donated $235,000 to Washington University for the establishment of a medical rehabilitation facility. And in October of 1959, the Irene Walter Johnson Institute of Rehabilitation opened at 509 South Euclid, and I started working there in 1984. What a small world. And my 2 co-workers are right here in the front row, and Kathy actually hired me. So Kathy was my boss when I worked at the Okay, so here's another connection. So not only did Roberts own International Shoe Company, he also owned a newspaper. I mean, did this guy ever have any free time? I don't think he did. He owned the St. Louis Star. Did you ever hear the St. Louis Star? Yeah. So he owned the St. Louis Star, big newspaper, and he had a partner, and his partner in that business was Edward G. Lewis. Well, who was Edward G. Lewis? Edward G. Lewis created University City. We would not have University City. We would not have that beautiful building that is now the City Hall without Edward G. Lewis. Edward G. Lewis built that beautiful building that we all drove past this morning. He built that as his magazine business. He had a women's magazine business, and he employed women. He was a real champion of women, and women being independent, and women being able to provide for themselves. So the world gets a little smaller because you see that house? Isn't that a cute house? That is in Deer Lodge, Montana. And Edward G. Lewis built these Women's League chapter houses throughout the United States. And this one that he built is in Deer Lodge, Montana, where my husband is from. And my husband and I, when I found this out, we went and we read the plaque, and it says that the building was designed by St. Louis architects. Isn't that amazing? St. Louis architects designed a building in Deer Lodge, Montana. It's just too much. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to University Forest. So University Forest could have looked like this, because Benost bought all this property, and he was a developer. He was going to build small houses, okay? And just to, you probably can't read this very well. So here's Partridge Avenue, here's Page Boulevard, and this is called Bradford Avenue. It's now Purdue Avenue, okay? So that gives you a context. And here, this is an interesting story. This is Ferris Avenue. Now, when I was growing up, all the streets were named after trees. It was called University Forest Estates. And my street was Hazelwood, and the next street was Willow Tree, and then there was White Oak. And we all were wondering, why is there a Ferris Road in our subdivision? It makes no sense. Well, the reason being is that Benost decided to scrap his idea of building those little houses, and instead he built the big mansion. So here's the big mansion right here. Here's the carriage house. See this big round thing? That's that track that the horse lover built. And believe it or not, this is a huge arbor. And when I was little and I went and then I would go over there, I thought there were dinosaurs in there. And I thought that the arbor had something to do with dinosaurs. I mean, you have to remember, I was probably 3 years old when I first started going over here. And so Ferris Avenue it comes up right here and goes up there. And there was another mansion up there. There was a family, the Ferris family, and they were related to the Benost family. And this mansion, I talk about it in my book, it was a white limestone, gorgeous mansion, and it looked like God lived there because it was very lit up and white, and it's just unbelievable. And of course it's been torn down as well. So let me just show you some streets here. So this is Hazelwood. This is where I grew up. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my house here, and Karen Tarko is here. This is Karen's house. And over here is the orphan home. So I know you all remember the orphan home if you've ever been down Partridge. So I have it here so you could see that when the mansion was destroyed, see those lots? Those all became houses. And there were 22 houses built there when the mansion was destroyed. Okay. And this, I'm just going to give you a little side here. So, so if this is my house, I would walk down here, and wander into the mansion. And when I was told by the caretaker that I could no longer come to the mansion, it broke my heart. And I would go anyway. And instead of turning down here, I would just keep going down Partridge and enter near where Canton Avenue was. And I had my dog Blackie, and Blackie and I would walk along the fence there. Yeah. Okay. So this is 7114 Hazelwood Lane. Now, it didn't look like that when I lived there. So when I lived there, my mom was a decorator, and she had a painted redwood, and this was a beautiful redbud tree, and she would put petunias around it with these beautiful, gorgeous rocks that she would get. And at the end of the porch there was a lilac bush, and you could, in the summer, it was just like heaven. You would sit on the porch and smell the lilacs. And it wasn't air conditioned, and so sometimes it would be so hot in the house that my dad would bring the TV outside, and we would watch TV on the porch. And I think there were times when we actually, I think Gary and I, we might have even slept on the porch because it was just so hot in the house. And I found this quote from Sand County Almanac, and Aldo Leopold says that to return not only spoils a trip, but tarnishes a memory. And I don't know if any of you have gone back to places that you loved at one time, but a lot of you are shaking your head and saying, yes, I've experienced that. It's just not the same. Yeah. So no, it's not the same. Okay, so here is my school, University Forest Elementary School. And this gives a big picture here. So this is a modern picture, and this is my house, and this is now, the school is now UC Forest Manor. It is now a skills nursing facility. And the
So they have a room for you.
yes, I could go back. That's true.
The circle of life.
That's right. Yes. And this is the orphanage here, and they have changed that area as well. So this is now a park. And when I was a kid, you weren't allowed to go on the grounds of the orphanage, you know, it was bad. But we did anyway. I did all the things I wasn't supposed to. But it's where I learned the names of all the trees, you know. That's how I learned the names of the trees, by going to these beautiful places and exploring. And they've now built a pond there. That pond was not there when I was living there. But this is so interesting. This is the lower level. Those of you that didn't go to UFARS don't know the lower level. But the lower level was where we had to run the 600-yard dash. And it's like, when I look at it, it's like torture. And we played soccer on that field. But what I loved also was I would go to, as a little kid, I would go to that field and I would catch butterflies and discover all kinds of insects. And so I was always trying to find ways to explore nature. And that neighborhood gave me all those opportunities. Okay, look at this. Oh my God. I hope I don't start crying when I tell you the story. But this is the old library on Trinity, right down the street. Oh, and I had to make the library a major feature of my book because it was a major feature of my life. And one day, my daughter Erin, she went to summer camp at Craft Alliance. And I got there a little too early, and I thought, well, I don't want to sit in the car, it's hot, you know. So I said, I'm going to walk around, explore, that's what I do. So I decided I'm going to go visit the old library, because that's my place. So I walked to the library. My dad used to drop me off right here, and I'd go down these stairs, and here's the stairs here, and I looked, the stairs were the same, those metal stairs. Oh, they were slick. And I looked into the door. There was a glass window on the door, and I looked in, and they had turned it into a senior center. And so there were all these older adults, you know, and they looked very engaged and active and happy. But, oh my gosh, the checkout desk was still there. The original checkout desk. Some of the bookcases were still there, and all the tables were still there that we all sat at and did our homework and our reports and everything. It was all the same, and seeing it, I burst into tears. And I realized that, you know, someday I'm going to write something about this library, because this library means everything to me. And it did, and it does. And there are those orange books. Remember the orange books that we checked out for all those book reports? Yes, the orange books. So, experiencing a setting. Research tells us that the more we experience a setting, the greater its power to alter our perception of the real world. And my mother used to say this to me. She says, you know, in some towns, some cities, there's a tavern on every corner. And she said, but in University City, there's a synagogue on most corners. And there were so many synagogues when we grew up. It felt like there was one on every corner. And during the Jewish holidays, you know, it was like 95% of the kids in each class, they were Jewish. And so the other kids, you know, they still had to go to school on the Jewish holidays. And what did they do? Well, they watched movies, they played outside, had extended recess, because they couldn't teach anything. You know, with the Jewish holidays, none of us were there. So there were also, you know, local restaurants that we all went to. There was Allen's Delicatessen, the Dairy Queen, and Hamburger Heaven, you remember?
Yeah.
Oh, hot sauce, yes. And we knew all the neighbors. I could go down the street on Hazelwood and Willow Tree, and I could tell you the name of every family that lived there. So that's how close we all were. And of course, the Delmar Loop. We came to the Delmar Loop for entertainment. There was bowling. There were 2 movie theaters. There was a bakery that I adored, and there was the dime store. I mean, it was just a kid's heaven, you know, to go and explore the Delmar Loop. And then all the activities, you know, we had Heman Park, and Heman Park offered us swimming and tennis. My family would have picnics at Heman Park, and you know what was really special? The St. Louis Symphony would play at Heman Park, and I remember my family, you know, packing up the folding chairs and going down to the park and listening to the symphony play. So it was a very rich community, very, very rich. And then again, you know, my whole thing was exploring nature, and so I was always finding spots to explore. So I think because I grew up here, that I grew up with a very strong self-esteem. And, but I also grew up with a false sense of security. I thought Jews were safe.